Good morning, everybody. I am here with the one, the only, Tracy Weeks. Welcome, Tracy. How are you?
Woohoo! Always glad to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We are excited. Some of you know that there were some more stimulus funds that became available to education institutions just recently. And Tracy happens to know and spend a lot of time studying up and better understanding these things. So we wanted to put together just a quick session, a quick Q&A session, a quick informational session to help you understand what those funds can be used for. Also wanted to let you know that we are hosting a really great webinar on February 4th. I am dropping a link right now in the comments. Click on it. Tracy, why don't you tell us first a little bit about what that webinar is focused on and some of the special guests that are joining us?
Absolutely. I'm super excited about the conversation we're going to get to have next week. So, when the CARES Act funds were passed back in the spring, we actually had several states that stepped up and took it as an opportunity to really think differently about how they were going to, do teaching and learning in their state, not just in the short term while they were in remote learning, but even thinking a little bit more long term post pandemic. And so they thought very purposefully about how they wanted to leverage those CARES Act funds to make sure that they had the systems in place, the content in place, the people in place to be able to do this both short and long term. So we're actually going to hear from two state leaders, Dr. Gwen Warmont from New Mexico and Tammy Van Wy from Alaska, as they tell the stories about the vision in those two states and what they hope it will lead to down the road. And we also have Congressman John Curtis, who represents Utah's 3rd congressional district, who is going to come talk to us about why Congress felt it was important to support schools in particular through these stimulus funds, both in the prior CARES Act funds and in the newest set of stimulus funds that were just passed in December of this past year.
It's fantastic. So with that, I'm going to throw a little screen up here that shows we're talking some serious money. Why don't you talk us through, Tracy, background on really what are the stimulus funds and give us just a little background on what's happening.
Absolutely. So, I think we've gotten very used to talking about CARES Act funds. This newest set of funds that was passed in December, they don't have a cute name like CARES. They're the CRRSA, which just really stands for the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. So that's a mouthful. I can't even say it when I'm reading it. So we're just going to call it the CRRSA funds or the new stimulus funds, either way. But with both sets of funds, they were actually divided for the most part for education into 3 buckets. And so you'll see these 3 buckets here. One of those buckets were given to the governors for their discretion. And we like to call those the GEAR funds. And you can see what the acronym stands for there. We also have the Esser Funds, which are the elementary and secondary school funds. Those went out to the state education agencies to then be distributed to the local education agencies across their states. And then there's also the HERF funds that were for our higher ed institutions. And you can see in our little chart here how all of those were divided up. But I think you can also notice that in each of those cases that on top of the CARES Act funds from March, that these most recent funds went above and beyond those. So those are in addition to the CARES Act funds. So there's actually quite a lot of money that is flowing to our states that is definitely absolutely needed to help support and mitigate, I think, a lot of the funding losses that our states are facing due to the economic crisis that is a fallout from the pandemic.
Tracy, what can you tell us? This is great. As we're thinking and looking at how do we support schools in remote, blended, even back to school, face-to-face models, what can these funds be used for?
Absolutely. So there's Actually, a whole list of ways that these funds can be used. I think first and foremost, when it comes in particular to the Esser funds for our K-12 institutions, any of the uses that are normally allowed under the titled funds, the Title 1, 2, 3, 4, all of those are allowed with these funds. And in addition, there are call outs, specifically when we think about um, shifting to remote learning, and even the shift through blended and back to face, supporting those with platforms from an ed tech perspective. There are specific call outs in both of these packages for using these funds for things anywhere from, cleaning the schools and testing and making sure that teachers have the equipment that they need in the face-to-face environment, but also in making sure that schools, teachers, students have the platforms in place to support online, remote, blended learning that, by the way, can also be used face to face. I think in the most recent set of funds, there's also a new emphasis on addressing learning loss. So helping schools have systems in place, and we often think about those as assessment platforms, but there are a lot of different ways we can think about them. But how do we figure out, what learning loss has taken place over the last, year? We're coming up on a year now since schools really had to start transitioning in the next month. Um, so how do we figure out what that loss has been so that we can actually make a plan for our students on how to go about mitigating that loss, getting them caught back up, and then continuing to achieve above and beyond. I'm really excited about the conversations I'm hearing from our educators across the country on really trying to think about, as we shift back into face-to-face, not just necessarily going back to all the ways we used to do things, but how do we take this as an opportunity to do new things?
That's an interesting point. So I'm meeting one of our excellent customers. If you're out there, Broward out in Florida, who we love, we're doing a really cool thing in February, late February, for the Digital Learning Day. And they're doing a lot of cool things with their educators. They're bringing in a lot of partners to kind of showcase some of the cool stuff that can be done. But we'd love to hear from all of you, community members. If you are, what is it that you're going to do? This pandemic has been horrendous and horrible, and we've been impressed by how teachers and educators have kept going. But we'd love to hear, are there any things that you've learned or practices that you put in place during the pandemic that you could carry on through after the pandemic, and how are you doing it? We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to shoot me a note, mark.booth at Instructure, or put them here in the comments. With that, Tracy, talk to us about timing. How long do institutions and education groups have to spend this money?
Absolutely. So the nice thing is they get a year from when each of those sets of funds were allocated to decide what to do with them, to actually award them, whether that's sending them to districts or using them with students at the higher ed level, whether it is entering into contracts directly at the state level. They have a year to make those decisions. And then really about another 6 months after that to a year to use those funds. So ultimately, the CARES Act funds, they have until this April through June, depending on when their state received their funds, to actually make the award. And they have to be actually used by September of 22. And then the most recent funds, they have to be awarded by next January. And then they have until September of 23 to actually use up all of those funds.
So, Tracy, you have sat in a variety of leadership positions in education. Tracy is now our executive director of really government affairs, and is working closely with the government to make sure that we're doing the right things to be able to help the education community. But I would love to hear, in your past and current life, what would you or should you be thinking about as an education administrator right now?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost, I think about supporting our educators that are out there that, by the way, have not stopped teaching and have been, really going through, depending on where you are in the country, a lot of ups and downs in terms of what you've had access to and what support has been given. I think when the pandemic first hit in the spring, there was a lot going on around, let's just figure out what we have, in our hands right this moment, and how do we put something together to try to access our kids. And actually, really before that, it was, are our teachers and students in a place that is safe to be during the day? Do they have food to eat? Then they started thinking about, if we are going to try to do teaching and learning remotely, do all of our students, do all of our teachers have devices? Do they have broadband access? And then they really all started thinking about, okay, so if we are able to check off, we've got a safe place to be, we've got food to eat, we have the devices, we have the connectivity. Now, what are the ways that we're going to actually go about doing teaching and learning online? And certainly Canvas has been proud to partner with so many school districts and states across the country as they've put those plans into place. But in many cases, there was a real short time frame. There wasn't what we would normally see in terms of both training new users and how to use a product, which still happened. But then I think there has been now, how do we help them know what best practices are? And there are teachers across the country who have been doing this actually for quite some time and have figured these things out. And so in many cases, it's how do we leverage, the things that educators have already discovered across the country, that they can share. And as a leader, I would want to know, how do I make sure to continue to support my teachers? How do I help them connect with those students? How do I make sure that every student is able to continue to access and is engaged and is coming to class every day? I know that has been, certainly a challenge across the country, is just, getting kids to log in every day and be present and be engaged. It definitely has not been an easy road, and I'm just so proud of all the work that our teachers have already been able to do across the country and continue to do every day.
Hear, 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 hear. Big praise for all the teachers out there. Reminder, we are doing a webinar on the 4th of February to dive a lot deeper than we have in these 10 minutes about what are all these funds for. Again, we're going to be joined. Tracy will be leading that webinar. We'll be joined by a couple of great educational leaders in both New Mexico and Alaska, and Congressman John Curtis from Utah. We'll be chatting about all things stimulus funding, answering questions that people may have about it. So join us. The link is on the different platforms, depending on where you are watching. Any closing thoughts for us, Tracy, as we wrap things up?
No, I'm just excited to continue to talk with educators as they're thinking about really how do we take this as a moment to really think differently about what we're doing for kids, and helping them to continue to grow and learn. And it's one of those moments where none of us wanted to be where we are, but now that we're here, how do we use this as an opportunity to rethink what we're doing with teaching and learning in our classrooms across the country?
Love it. Big thanks to Tracy Weeks. We look forward to seeing you all on the 4th of February. As you can see there are a significant amount of funds that are available to you as educators through the government, and we hope that you'll use them. Teresa, I love Canvas. I've been an online college educator for 15 years. It's the best platform. Teresa, we love you. We do indeed love you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We will be back again this week. In the meantime, start taking a look at that government funding and make sure you're using it to best help your kiddos, students, and educational institutions. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.